Welcome to our city council meeting, and let's start the meeting. It's August 7th, 2023, and let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Pastor Lynn Lamberty of the United Methodist Church will lead us in prayer.
So, Mayor, members of the council, just an observation before we pray. Democracy is a special thing, and it wouldn't work without people willing to hold office like you all do and being willing to be conscientious in what you do. So I want to thank you for your service. We're used to thanking military folks and various other people for that, but thanks for your being here. And it wouldn't work without people from the community coming and bringing their concerns and their ideas and all of that. So thanks for all of you who are here tonight as well. May we pray tonight. We thank you, Lord, for this time. And we pray that your wisdom may be in this place and that your spirit may be here as well. We know that there's always room for debate and discussion, and that around some things, not everybody's going to agree. But we just pray that people can listen well, that they can focus well, and that even when there is disagreement, that it may not be the kind that divides people for a long time, but that it simply be something that inspires folks to think more deeply and to think better about whatever the issue is. And so we pray your blessings on our community. We pray your blessings on this body. Help us all to come together, to work together, to make this a better place to be always. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, Pastor. That brings up reviewing our minutes from the previous meeting.
Mr. Mayor, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of the July 17, 2023 City Council meeting and the July 31st, 2023 City Council work session.
Second it.
Got a motion and a second. Is there any questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Moves us down to our appropriation ordinance, number 7A and number 8.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
Erica, question about at the very start, the Gregory Keeter. What was that? It just says Pride in Progress.
Gregory Kiter is the property owner from which we acquired the easement for the airport, and the airport runway construction project was paid out of the Pride in Progress Fund.
I forgot that. Thank you, Josh.
Yes, sir.
Second thing, Erica, number 80732, there was no name. And it says June use tax. It was $2,222, no name.
At the Kansas Department of Revenue. That's
Oh.
for our monthly tax that we have to pay in for our sales and use
Okay.
tax.
That's all I have.
Anybody else with questions?
Mr. Mayor, I'll make a motion to approve appropriation ordinance number 7A dated July 19th, 2023, and ordinance number 8 dated August 2nd, 2023.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. Brings us down to our visitor section, and former Mayor Christy Williams is here to discuss a potential corporate donation for the Castle Park.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, City Council, for giving me this opportunity to make my request. Before I do, I would like to thank Chuck May with Schwab Eaton for providing our first donation. He's providing the survey, which is about a $1,500 value, and we really do appreciate that. We appreciate Josh that has connected me with so many people, and Erica for helping us get our account set up, which will probably happen tomorrow. So our first meeting is is this Thursday at Robinson. It's a kickoff meeting, and that's at 6:30 p.m. We invite the community to come and find out how they can become more involved. But my request today is actually because with talking with our city manager and those in Topeka, we have a relationship with BNSF. The city does an important relationship through the years, as well as a relationship in Topeka. And because of their community support, we think there's possible interest in participating with this project. In doing so, I would like to submit an application. It would be a grant application, of course, no guarantees, but I would like to submit it in the amount of $50,000. In doing so, there are a couple ways to approach it. One, we could bring it before their entire national board, but they don't have specific times that they meet. And so that could be time consuming, and we would know, for example, when that may or may not get approved. But the second option that seemed more viable, and that's why I'm here today, is the option that Topeka took in one of their playground facilities. And that was to take $10,000 or to accept $10,000 every year. And that would not have for 5 years. And then that would not require approval from the national board. It would require approval at the local level, which is in, I believe, Topeka. So with that, my request is if we fill out and submit an application through the city of Augusta, in which I would be putting together the application and only sending to the city if there were things that they needed to sign off on. I would submit the application with the understanding that hopefully we might qualify for a 2023 and 2024. That would provide us $20,000 by the time of the bid or the build. And then that would mean that there would be $30,000 outstanding potentially. And if we were so lucky to be awarded that amount, that grant amount, my request would be that the city council take action tonight and affirm that with a positive vote that would allow basically an advance of $30,000 to the play park. And then the city would be reimbursed $10,000 each year after the build is over. And of course, if we do not get the grant, then it's null and void. But I wanted to not make the application without your approval first. So that is my request.
Any thoughts, council?
I have no problem with it. I mean, I think it's,
We can make it work. Okay, Josh.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mayor, I'll make a motion to approve the application process for $50,000 to Burlington Northern Santa Fe, contingent upon a grant approval with Christy Williams and going through our staff.
I second it.
Got a motion and a second to go after this grant. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank
Christie.
you, City Council.
Okay. At this time, I have a request from a person here that wants to address us about their monthly water bill. Is it Connor? If you'll come up and state your name and your address and then make your statement to us or question or.
Can you hear me very well?
Yep.
Thank you for your time tonight. So I'm kind of new to Augusta. My wife's from around here. She owns the property really at 1415 State Street. So it was kind of new to me and everything like that when it comes to the monthly water bill. The clerks were great to talk to. Just sounded like I might need more information from you all. I'm hoping you guys can provide that. We had a tenant check out of the place about May 6th, or June 6th, sorry. And then we had a new tenant take that spot in July 6th. So the first one was June 5th, July 6th. We got charged $16 for the monthly bill when they checked out. So June 6th to like the 15th and the 15th to like the 31st. And then we got charged another $16, but we were only there for 6 days. And then the other tenant took over. So I was told that the tenant before and the tenant after and us twice got charged for a month. So you have $16 charged twice in each month. So $16 by the tenant, $16 by us, $16 by the tenant, and $16 by us. It seemed like a duplicate charge to me, but they said that it's just how it worked. So I wanted to get more information on how that worked. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Mayor,
we'd
if you
have
don't
to-
mind, I might be able to answer. I think what you're referring to is considered the base fee for the water usage.
Correct.
And so your tenant who moved out on July or June 5th, 6th, whichever day it was,
Yeah, June 5th.
they paid
sorry.
the $16 for that first part of that billing cycle.
Yes.
And then you as the landlord took over for the rest of the month.
And
And so you were charged another base fee.
Correct.
And then same the next month, you were charged for the first 5 days and your other tenant was for the last. And what happens there is the base fee is per bill, per month, per user. So there's no provision in the ordinance to allow for that to be prorated. Because we could have 3 people responsible for a bill in 1 month.
Right.
And we'd have to go out and calculate how many days each of those people were responsible for that bill, and it'd have to be prorated. Right now, the ordinance does not allow for that. It would be manual in order to calculate all of that. But that's what that charge is. It's that base fee. We have that for the electric as well and our other utilities. So
Yes, thank you very much for clarifying that. It's
I just
exactly
wanted to
what I'm
make
talking
sure
about.
that they
Yes, that's what I'm
understood,
talking about. So to me, there might be some clerical stuff within the system that might be difficult. It just seemed to be an extra charge on our end, and whether the tenant needs to pay it or we need to pay, that's not your guys' issue. It's charging $16 twice in 1 month for one property. Seemed a little different to me.
And we do that as well for anybody who moves out throughout the month, whether it's the landlord or just a new
Yes.
tenant. So if your new tenant had moved in on June 7th,
Mhm.
they would have had 2 charges still in that same month. It just wouldn't have happened in July because it would have only been 1 user that month.
Gotcha.
Josh, you got any ideas?
No, I mean, it's, in terms of the logistics of it, Erica's going to know it much better than I, how that works. I mean, the only thing I could suggest if you wanted to change it would be to see what other processes exist out there, because I can't tell you, but that would be where I would start, is researching what other municipal utilities are doing in that regard, to see if there's other methods, and then trying to weigh that with our existing staffing and software and everything, and see if that's a doable option or not.
Okay.
And it would be an issue for our other utilities as well because those base fees apply. I think the only one we don't is the solid waste because it's one charge for the whole month. So we do prorate that based on the service for the month because it's based on usage, not the base.
I imagine it's something you run in more too with rentals than you would in
More than, yeah. Yes.
turnover. I guess
Well, I mean,
it
not
could still
really.
be possible with owner occupied homes.
The biggest issue is like with the landlord, you could have had that new tenant could have moved in June as well. So you would have had 3 base fees in that 1 month. That base fee covers a lot of things that occur, whether or not there's 1 person there or 3 moves.
Mhm.
But some of that is accounted for in the disconnect or in the reconnect fees, the new tenant fees, and you pay a fee as well to have it transferred into your name and held for that time as well. So I would be more than happy to go and look at what other communities are doing with their utilities for that, both for water and electric specifically. And I would have to check and see what we do with sewer and wastewater. But I would suspect it's the same for those as well.
So at the end of the day, there's an activity happening each time.
Right, there's a
So
move
there's
in and
work
move out.
happening is the reason there is a fee
Right,
each time.
and
I
meters
guess
have
what
to
we're
be
getting
read
at here.
and
Right.
Yeah, and if I'm understanding it correctly, it's tracking with an account holder and not to an address per se. And so what you would have to
Exactly.
do is go a different direction and have a charge to an address, no matter how many transactions are occurring in a given month, in order for it to just be the one charge spread over that time. And I don't know if there's a good way of doing it or not. Maybe someone's figured that out and we just haven't. I don't know, but it sounds like it's tied to the account activity. But
And
that's,
I could
that's
just
something
send-
we can look into.
I was gonna say, it
I
won't hurt
can-
to look into it, activity.
it would be easy enough to get some feedback from some other communities with what they do, so.
When should I try to follow up with you all to see what that's about? What's a reasonable amount of time?
So any changes right now would be from here moving forward. So I don't know if you're asking if you'd be considered for a refund for that, or if it'd be,
On that, moving forward.
right? If you call into the utility office and ask for me, my name is Erica Jones, I'm the city clerk. You can feel free to check in with me anytime. If you want to leave me something with your email address,
Certainly.
I would be happy to email you when we're going to bring it back to the council.
Yeah, certainly. I appreciate it. Thank you guys for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks for bringing it to our attention.
Thank you.
Okay. Is there any other visitors here that weren't on the agenda or part of the agenda? Okay, that moves us into our business section. So we'll have the presentation of our 2022 audited financials. Staff?
Yes, Mayor and Council, I'm just going to go ahead and turn over presentation of the staff report to City Clerk Finance Director Erica Jones.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This is pretty straightforward, this audit this year. It's the same thing that was noted last year about the credit cards and the sales tax. That was the only thing noted in the audit of any concern. There were two items. One of them was a purchase at eBay, which was made. The book that was going to be purchased was almost double that on Amazon or somewhere else. So it was a significant savings to do it through eBay, even though there was sales tax charged. It was $3.83, I think. So still cost effective. The other one was made, and we found that after the fact. Again, my staff and I review those purchases every single month with the statement. Unfortunately, it is after those purchases are made that we see those. So we use it more as a corrective action and talk to those people. But outside of that, we had a really successful audit. Things went really well. This was our second year. And so I think we were a little bit more routine. You had some new staff, so we had to get some of them up to speed as well, but it went really well. And they were in and out in one day. And we did have a single audit, and I'm going to let Sean speak to that to explain that, because this is the first year we've had to have one in a really long time. But it's related to our federal grant awards. So with that, I don't think I have anything new to add outside of what was in the agenda memo. So I'll turn it over to Sean.
All right, sounds good. Mayor and council members, my name is Sean Gordon with Gordon CPA. We performed the 2022 audit of the city. So I'll go through the audit report that was in the agenda packets. Just kind of point out some of the highlights of each section. We'll start with pages 1 through 3. This is called the Independent Auditor's Report. Here we discuss a variety of things, but the most important paragraph is the third paragraph down. You'll see the italicized heading called Unmodified Opinion on Regulatory Basis of Accounting. This paragraph pretty much says that the highest and cleanest opinion we could issue the city's financial statements, we did issue the city's financial statements. So it reflects very well on the overall financial and internal control management of the city during that time period. Further down on this, in this section, we talk about management and the council's responsibilities for the city's financial statements, and then a few of our responsibilities as well. Flipping forward to pages 4 through 5, this is called the Summary Statement of Receipts, Expenditures, and Unencumbered Cash. Here you'll see in the left-hand column all of the different funds of the city, and then the beginning cash of each of those funds, receipts, expenditures, and then ending cash. And you'll see at the very bottom of that right-hand column on page 5, you'll see that the city ended with $28.3 million of cash on hand at December 31st. The next section forward starts on page 6 and runs through page 14. This section is called the Notes to the Financial Statements. Here we discuss a variety of things, including some of the accounting policies that the city follows, information on cash and investments, long-term debt information on budgeted transfers. Like I said, quite a bit of information is discussed here. And then the next kind of big section starts on page 15 and runs through page 42. And these are just more detailed breakouts of those funds that we saw earlier on pages 4 through 5. So each fund has its own page where we have a little bit more breakout of the different types of revenues and expenses in each of those funds. And in this section, you'll also see how each fund operated compared to the budget that was adopted for 2022 as well. And then, as Erica said, the single audit section, that starts on page 43 and runs to the end of the audit report, which is page 50. This is kind of a new section that the city hasn't seen in a while. So anytime an entity receives and spends $750,000 or more of federal grant money, it's required to undergo what's called a single audit. So because of all the kind of COVID money that the city has received and spent over the past few years, that triggered the single audit requirement in 2022. So we're allowed to kind of focus on one or two grants kind of programs that the city runs. And for 2022, we focused on the base grants and the base grant program that the city had. So we check a variety of things, including making sure that the city is following all regulatory state and federal requirements of that grant and grant money. And so we're also required to issue an opinion on how that grant was managed as well. So we also issued an unmodified opinion on that grant, which again reflects very well on how grant requirements were followed by city staff and everybody in the entire grant process. As Erica said, we had one audit recommendation this year over the credit cards, and she covered that. So that's something that we'll check on again next year when we do that, do the 2023 audit. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is that we did have a very good audit this year. Erica and her staff always take very good care of us and get us, documentation when we ask for it, and then answer any questions that we might have. So we do appreciate that. With that, any questions that I can answer?
Yes, I have one on page 69.
Okay.
And I'm not sure how that lays out in your page 35. I think of there was the budget line.
Oh, yep.
Had a bunch of X's. in
Yeah,
it.
that's a number that just needs to be expanded a little bit because those are such big budget numbers there. So that's something that we can correct.
Could we go over that or?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so the total of that, the first one, the budget column, would be the total of those, the 8.8, the 340, the 1.35, and the million. So the city actually ended up being 8. Well, I'd have to get.
I think Josh is doing the math.
I was just reading it and I'd like to see the complete numbers is
Yes.
all it was.
And it's in a PDF. We could always reissue that page so that you have it
Yes.
with it
Yeah,
expanded
yeah.
so that you can see that
So
full
the
amount.
budgeted amount on the receipt side was 11,571,300. So the city had budgeted a little bit more than the actual revenues that were received in that fund. And then the expense side, they were under budget.
12 or 13.
The total budget of the expenditure side was 13,425,420. So again, they were under budget by the 915,000.
Thank you.
I think we have a third year engaged with you guys, so you'll be doing our 2023 audit as well, and then we'll look at whether we want to request that we consider them for the next period. So we'll need to do that about this time next year.
I'd just like to say, it sounds like Erica and her staff has done another fine job. And this audit looks good.
I agree. Good job, Erica.
I move to accept the city's 2022 audited financials as presented by the city auditor.
Second.
Got a motion and a second to accept these financials by our city's auditor. Any other questions? All those in favor?
I have one unrelated to the audit, but let's take the vote first.
Okay. So all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, Mr. Rivas.
One of the other agenda items we have on tonight is considering the approval of a charter ordinance exempting us from the provisions of KSA 14570 and 14571. Do you have a professional opinion or pros or cons of us doing so?
Yeah, so a pro is it's easier accounting for the city staff. If you don't invoke this, you would be subject to GAAP requirements of accounting. So that would be tracking fixed assets, tracking receivables, tracking depreciation. It requires more staff. It requires more time. Another con is it requires more time from the auditor. So the audit fees would also increase as well. I would say probably 90 to 95% of cities, Augusta size and smaller, do follow the GAAP waiver, which is what you'd be waiving if you adopted these ordinances.
Yeah, Sean,
I think.
sorry, what Sean's speaking of is actually the next item, the gap waiver. You've gone down two more items into the charter ordinance, which is something else.
And I don't think you haven't been, you're not familiar with that, what's
Okay,
being
yes.
proposed, yes. Because that's just been ran through the financial advisor and the
Oh,
bond
gotcha.
And
attorney.
our city's
My
bond
fault.
council, so.
Yeah, our bond
But
attorney and financial
He's
advisors.
the auditor that has to look over
I like
all
your
these.
feedback on that. Though. That was good.
Well, and I think it's just that he would, so he's auditing the financials. That's a legal perspective, that's what the bond attorney is responsible for that.
Okay,
I don't-
I'm
I
not
don't know.
familiar with what the statutes say on that, so I couldn't give an opinion tonight on it.
okay, thank you.
Okay. Well, that moves us down to item 2, resolution number 2023-09, requesting the State Director of Accounts and Reports waive the requirements of KSA 75-1120A, parentheses A, for the city's 2023 financial statements and reports.
Mayor and
Staff?
council, I think Sean did a good job of explaining why we do that, and it's something we do routinely every year. So with that, I'll turn it back over.
I agree with Erica. Sean done a good job of answering it. So I move for approval of resolution number 2023-09, requesting the State Director of Accounts and Reports waive the requirements KSA 75-1120AA with regard to the city's 2023 financial statements and reports.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Any questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Item 3, notice of hearings to exceed revenue neutral rate. Sean, thank you. And budget hearing for the proposed 2024 budget. Staff?
Mayor and council, this is just the notice for you to consider and approve and authorize staff to publish that. My hope is for it to go in Saturday's newspaper. And so it's just, we've already set the hearing dates, but this is the actual notice that would be published, setting those maximum limits that were discussed and decided on at the budget work sessions. So with that, I'll just turn it back over to you.
I'll make a motion to authorize city staff to publish the notice of hearings to exceed the revenue neutral rate and budget hearing for the proposed 2024 budget. Second.
Got a motion and a second. Any questions, comments? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries. Let's move down to item 4, our charter ordinance number 20 relating to public improvements and the issuance of bonds. Staff.
Yes, Mayor and Council, we started discussing this item at a prior meeting, but our bond counsel was not available. As you're aware, during our budget work session period and over the past few months, we've been talking about some larger projects that are tied into a bond issuance. And as bond counsel was looking at that, and some of the amounts associated with some of the projects, one of the items they suggested that a number of cities do is to consider a charter ordinance that allows us to manage that in a slightly different way. And so rather than take Kevin's thunder and explain too much of that, I'm going to go ahead and let the bond counsel speak, explaining the charter ordinance. But I will say that based on the conversation that we had at the last council meeting, one of the variations in this presentation is that you actually have a couple of different options. So you have the original presentation, the original recommendation, and then a modified version if there's some types of concerns with the way the original one was written. So Kevin put those options together, and I'll let him explain what they are and why and how this is used.
Good evening, Mayor, Honorable Council. Kevin Cowan with Gilmore and Bell, City's Bond Council. Josh is correct. This was my idea, so I'll start in and give some background and thought as it relates to the upcoming project, and then we can discuss the options that Josh referenced. So the project we were discussing was the Public Works Building, which pretty sizable project and general obligation bonds for that project. The city is subject to a statutory debt limit as it relates to general obligation bonds, and that debt limit is 30% of your assessed valuation. There are a number of exceptions to the debt limit. Anything you do for utility improvements, exempt from the debt limit. Improvements to intersections of streets, exempt from the debt limit. One of the things not exempt from the debt limit is buildings. You have general obligation bonds for buildings. So again, because it was a sizable project, I suggested to Josh, maybe we consider a charter ordinance. The charter ordinance that you've seen and discussed, and really under both options, the only thing it changes in the particular statute that we're talking about is it removes an election requirement. And the statute as drafted says that if you have something listed in your CIP, you're authorized to issue general obligation bonds for that project. There's an election requirement, and then any bonds issued are exempt from the debt limit. What we have helped other cities do when it's appropriate, if there's a debt limit concern, is charter that statute so we have bonds issued under that statute and they can be exempt from the debt limit. What's unique here is the building project you're talking about doesn't require an election anyway. So we're not trying to circumvent an election requirement for this project. Just as an aside, there are election requirements for general obligation bonds for public building projects that are new city hall facilities, new library, new recreational centers, and community centers. Anything else, including new public works buildings, public safety buildings, additions to an existing city hall or library, none of those things require an election. So again, this is not something that will require an election if we issue general obligation bonds for the public works facility. And my only thought in this discussion and this consideration is, well, it may give you a little debt limit relief if you have this charter ordinance and use it instead of the other statute that you can issue the bonds under without an election, but it does not have an exception to the debt limit. The debt limit, the city's in good shape as it relates to the debt limit, and this would be a sizable issue, but I think you would still be in good shape. I told Josh this, I'll tell you this. Two things inform my thinking about debt limit and whether you should try to preserve it, maybe if you have a good opportunity to do so. And that those two things are natural disasters, the tornado in Greensburg and then the flood in Coffeyville. And in both those situations, the cities had some short-term needs before insurance payouts were going to be received, and we're issuing temporary notes to repair city hall, public buildings, those sorts of things. And we're having debt limit difficulties. They couldn't go do what they needed to do because of the debt limit, even though everybody would agree, well, you got to go do what you got to do, and you're going to get insurance proceeds to pay off those temporary notes anyway. But it was just the way the statutes existed and still exist. And so it's kind of a preserve it for a rainy day if you have an opportunity. So again, what was presented a couple of weeks ago when I couldn't be here, that was what I would consider a more broad version of the charter, where it removes the election requirement completely and says that the governing body in the future has the option of either subjecting a project that you want to have bonds issued under the charter ordinance, subject it to an election requirement directly, or subject it to a protest period, which could lead to an election. But neither of those things were required, completely discretionary for a future governing body. When Josh and I talked some more, I said, well, maybe we can make this more narrow if there's any concern about, we don't know what a future governing body would do. This may throw this wide open on some projects that we think an election should be required, or maybe some process should be required. So the more narrow version that I drafted actually borrows heavily from a charter ordinance that this group, maybe not this group, the governing body of the city of Augusta passed a number of years ago when we issued general obligation bonds to refinance the KDHE sewer loan on the wastewater plant. And again, that statute, sort of antiquated, had an election requirement for any substantial, at that time, anything more than a couple $100,000 for wastewater improvements. So we bumped up the 200,000 to, I think, 1.5 million. Maybe it's 1.2 million, but require a notice and protest on any project under the charter. So I borrowed that language and dropped it into the more narrow version. What that means, the more narrow version would say if this charter ordinance became effective, this project could proceed, the Public Works building could proceed under the charter ordinance, be exempt from the debt limit. But anything in the future would have to go through a notice and protest period where you could have a protest and it would get forced to an election. I should also add, and I was thinking about this today, a number of projects, major street projects, major building projects, you can find a statute that's going to require an election for those. You can many times find a statute that's not going to require an election. And I say that just to indicate that if either of these charter ordinances were passed and became effective, but you had a desire as a governing body in the future to acknowledge we don't have to have an election, but we want to have an election, we can find a statute if the governing body wanted to do that. So again, the entire thinking was we're not trying to do the Public Works building project and bonds for it without an election. That's not going to be required anyway. It's just the thinking was, well, if we don't have to have an election anyway, maybe we can get a little debt limit relief with a charter ordinance. And if you as a governing body think the first one was too general, too broad, understand that. And that's why we wanted to have another option that's more narrow that would say only this project is exempt from any sort of publication, protest, election requirements. It can proceed, but anything in the future would be subject to some process. So I know that's a lot. I'll stop there. The goal was, again, on this project to maybe give you a good option.
And Council, may I ask one question before? So another piece in our conversation, can you explain how the Public Building Commission used to fit into this as well? Because I believe that was an avenue that we exercised a lot as a community.
Right.
So how did that work in relation to these elections and
Yeah, so good point. You do have a Public Building Commission. It's, I think, unless you dissolved it, it's been used before. That's the other option that we typically see if somebody has maybe debt limit concern. We really see it a lot with counties because their debt limit is only 3% of assessed valuation, and their building projects are typically really expensive for a new courthouse or jail or something. So they have real debt limit concerns sometimes. And a Public Building Commission can be used in those situations. And I apologize, Josh. I'm sure I looked at it that day. I think while a couple of the projects in the past Public Building Commission did not require notice and protest, I think there is a charter ordinance as it relates to the Public Building Commission. And I think it and the statute still would require notice and protest on this sort of public building project or a public facilities project. So just kind of full disclosure, if you didn't have either one of these charter ordinances and there was a debt limit concern in the future because it was a building project, for example, that would probably be my first suggestion. Let's visit the Public Building Commission possibilities and see if we could use that. And so that that would be sort of head on if we didn't take any actions now to sort of prepare for possibilities in the future as it related to general obligation bonds. You still have some wiggle room because you have a public building commission that could be used for building projects. I mentioned street intersections that don't count against the debt limit. Other than that, your transportation projects, and you've done a number of them through the last several years and probably will have more, just streets and sidewalks, those do count against the debt limit. So most of what you've been doing, talking about transportation or buildings, those are things that count against the debt limit. And that was part of my thinking as well, to just give you some options and have this discussion. If you as a group aren't interested in either of these, that's okay. Your public works project can still proceed with general obligation bonds, as I mentioned, under the different statute.
Kevin, with most of the communities you work with, which way do they go? Do they go with the more conservative approach or the one that we approached at the last meeting?
It varies. Sometimes, honestly, a governing body may not dig into it as much as you all, I think, have. Probably just how broad do we want this to be? It could be used for any project. This is a popular charter ordinance for cities of the second class. And I mentioned to Josh when we were talking about it, City of Bel Air, which has, Woodlawn, and they're going to have some Rock Road and 53rd Street projects on the northeast side of Wichita. They use it for that because those are expensive projects and would eat up a lot of debt limit. So again, probably more frequently the general option, with the thought of, well, we just never know. We might want to use this in the future. We can't even think of the project that might be good for. But I also understand, this group digs into the details, thinks about the future and sort of what do we want to have apply in the future. And this is a similar discussion. It's one of the reasons I thought of the other charter ordinance on the wastewater that we had then. Do we want to make it very broad and you do any wastewater project you want to do without an election or anything at any time? Or do we want to make it narrow and say this project, which is a refinancing of the loan, not going to require anything, but in the future, we do have some hurdles you'd have to clear. So I would say other cities, probably the more general one, but this city has a history of maybe doing things more narrowly. And again, that's okay. And one of the things I like about this discussion is this isn't necessary for the project we're talking about. This is more, would we like to have this tool in the toolbox in the future and maybe preserve some debt limit? It's not pressing for anything in particular. It's more just planning and maybe would we like to have this tool in the future?
And that's the main thing. This would keep us from getting into the problem. If we do have some big project that comes up, looks like an opportunity, we don't hit or try to exceed our debt limit.
Right. And again, a lot of your larger projects have been buildings and street projects, which will all count against the debt limit, absent something like this, or again, the intersections of streets for some reason are exempt from the debt limit.
Now, you used Coffeyville and Greensburg as examples of disasters where they couldn't immediately take care of things. Is there a way of getting around that if we didn't do this tonight?
Probably the Public Building Commission.
But could it also slow us down?
Yeah, I mean, the Public Building Commission issue subject to notice and that's kind of a 60-day process to get authorized, and then you can move pretty quickly. So that's a good point. It would probably slow you down a little bit in that circumstance.
Kevin, maybe I've never seen this. I don't have any experience with it, but no fund warrants is what, can you speak on how that?
Well, maybe it just depends on what it is. No fund warrants can be used if you have a budgeted fund and whatever you budgeted in that fund will be insufficient to pay for the necessary expenditures that year. It's tricky for cities. The one we use, the category we use with cities usually relates to utilities and an emergency there. Drought is one of them. So if you budgeted a certain amount in your water utility, or your electric utility and there's drought or something else that throws your budget completely askew, then you can use no fund warrants to plug that gap. If it was, our city hall was damaged by a tornado and we need $1 million in the next month to even be functioning, I'm not sure about that. We haven't done no fund warrants. If it doesn't fall within one of the neat categories, there's this broad category where you can go to the Board of Tax Appeals and ask for permission. And that's a pretty high bar, believe it or not. We've tried to use that with a smaller city that had an ambulance that broke down and they needed to go buy a new ambulance to have EMS services. That was their emergency. And the Board of Tax Appeals rejected it and basically said, well, you could have planned for something like this. So that's been a number of years ago. So, different Board of Tax Appeals composition now, but you just never know. It really is fact dependent on the no fund warrants, depending on what the emergency and the need is, maybe.
Is this charter, excuse me, is this charter ordinance that the broad one tonight, is it different than what we looked at last month?
No, I changed the dates for the meeting.
Because I don't remember the
that is all.
provision being in last time that, that the resolution may contain, but is not required to contain the publication.
Yeah,
That was in the last one?
it was, but that's kind of what I was referencing earlier. It just makes it discretionary where it's may and not shall, very clearly may and not shall. So you or a future governing body could choose to ignore all the notice and protest election requirements. And so again, I built that in there. It will give you an option. If it was this same governing body a year from now and you had another project and this was the charter ordinance that was in place, the more broader one, then that language, you're right, that's the language. You may subject it to notice and protest, but you don't have to. You may subject it to an election, but you don't have to. You can just proceed.
Well, when you say election, you're referring to the petition process also, right?
No, the petition process is the notice and protest. That could lead to an election. If you say we want to subject this to notice and protest, we're going to publish it. If there's a protest petition, then you can't proceed unless you have a successful election on that. That's kind of option one that we're talking about. Option two is you could just say, we're going to skip all that. We just want to put this to a vote and have an election. Hasn't been protested. We don't know if it would be protested. We just want to have an election on this. And that option's in there. And that's a long section. I mean, that's the meaning of it, though. You have three options. No process at all. You just authorize the bonds. Second is subjected to notice and protest. If there's a protest, that means there's an election. Or you can put it directly to an election. And later in that section, it says, if you had notice and protest, there was a protest. Or if you put it directly to an election, you can't proceed with the project until you've had a successful election. And then otherwise, you can just proceed if that makes sense.
Well, I'm personally opposed to doing away with any protest period or the publication or, I just think that's to me is a very important part of this process is to give people the ability to protest. And I don't want to take that away.
And the narrow version, as we're calling it, would recognize that exactly.
But on
Except for
that
this
one,
project.
is the Public Works building going to be a standalone bond? Or is there going to be other stuff in our list that's going to be added into that bond?
We've talked about temporary notes, and the trail project would be part of that. Now,
And the 6 or 7 other projects, the traffic lights, the
okay,
parking lots, all of those things. And that, again, it's a strategic choice how you
Right.
want to group all of those and structure them. But I mean, what I would be envisioning is a bond issue that covers all of that. That's what we were discussing, is just do all of those projects at
but
once.
I'll add the bond issue, the bond ordinance and resolution, that's the end of the process. And what we're talking about is the beginning of the process. So if if we said public works under a charter ordinance is not going to be subject to notice, protest, or anything like that. Future projects would be, but the other projects we're talking about would have to have their own authority. Even if whether it was traffic signals, although we could find a way to authorize those outside of the charter ordinance. But if the list of projects later this year included some things that we would want to use the charter ordinance for, then they would be subject to notice and protest under the narrow version. We're just saying the public works building wouldn't be. And part of my thinking when I draft things this way is the charter ordinance is going to be subject to notice and protest. And I think we're all going to understand, we're trying to put this in place to use it for the public works building. So if the charter ordinance gets protested, we know, well, we're either going to have an election on the charter ordinance, or we'll just abandon it and we'll use the other authority that I referenced earlier for public works. So still have a lot of options, but I did want to make it clear, if you have 8 projects and a bond issue, they're going to have to be authorized separately. Usually there are different statutes that apply to bonding for different types of projects. And so not saying you'll have 8 resolutions, but you may have 8 different statutes or charter ordinances that we'd have to rely on to get the bonds authorized for 8 different projects. But to Josh's point, if you get to that point, you've authorized bonds. At this point, you've authorized bonds for the trail or the initial phase of the trail. We may authorize some more bonds. There'll be separate proceedings for those. But then if you issue one issue, you can achieve some economies of scale. So we take 8 separate authorizing proceedings, put it in one bond issue so we don't have 8 separate bond issues or a number of bond issues and pay bond issuance costs every time.
So
And so-
the total expenses be included in this more localized or the more constricted one, the total bond amount, or just the bond amount for the cost of the public works building?
I think what we've contemplated is just public works. Now, again, the trail project's already been authorized, and Josh just mentioned a list of other things, and we would just work through, well, how do we authorize bonds under the statutes for that? But all we've talked about is that it's just for the public works building. And again, it really was the debt limit driver. That's going to be a large issue for you all compared to some of the other components of the project.
So the efficiencies he's describing, when you look at our budget, you can go back in prior years and see how these things break out. But in our various bond funds, when you see bonds issued, you'll normally have line items that show the cost of issuance. And so when you separate those things out, we're paying for a process multiple times, and that process can cost us 30 or 40 grand for a singular issue. And that's why it's kind of inefficient for us to do small projects with that, because that cost of issuance doesn't change a whole lot, whether it's a huge costing project or a small one. So if you don't group that in, what you're doing is you're just layering $30,000, $40,000 at a time cost of issuance on a bunch of other smaller projects, which is why I've been looking at that grouping, and even doing the grouping with the trail stuff just for issuance purposes to save on some of those costs. But that's all a strategy discussion, and but that was my basis for it. I mean, is that a fair statement that no matter what that costs, the cost of no matter how much we're financing, that cost of issuance is kind of stable?
It is definitely marginally less expensive as you go higher. I mean, I can speak for us as bond counsel. There's a certain amount of work that's going to go into these things, whether it's 800,000 or 8 million. And so that's going to be built into what we charge. But when you get on the higher end of that, our fee schedule really only considers, well, there's a difference between liability and risk, giving a legal opinion on $8 million in securities than 800,000. And so to your point, it's when you get to the higher numbers, it's not that it's a lot more work that's built in on the low end. It gets marginally cheaper because you're really just addressing, well, there's there's a lot of risk involved if it's an $80 million issue versus 800,000. And so there will be some difference there, but sometimes there's not a difference in the amount of work. And so that's a long way of saying, yeah, it just marginally gets cheaper. I mean, an $800,000 issue, if you look at what percentage of the 800,000 would go to costs of doing the deal, is going to be a much
I don't
larger
like it for that
percentage
reason,
of
man.
proportion than it is for an $8 million. Just gets less expensive.
I'd just like to make a comment. I really don't care whether we go with the general charter or the more narrow one that Ron likes, but I do think we need to go with one or the other because of the simple fact of how it affects us on our fiscal impact and our funding source as far as our debt limit calculations go, and could hamper us down the road if we do not pass one of these two ordinances. As I said, I don't care which one we go with. I think either one of them would work.
Well, how long has this ordinance been in existence, Josh? Do you know?
What do you mean?
This charter ordinance that we're trying
The
to
charter
change?
ordinance is not in existence for us right now. You would be passing it to bring it into existence.
I understand that, but what we're changing, how long has that been in existence? I mean,
Oh, the statute?
yeah, the statute, I'm sorry.
Yeah, since it was adopted by
I'm
the state
sorry, I said it
legislature.
wrong. I mean,
Yeah.
It's an
Probably
old
50s,
statute.
40s, maybe.
Decades. I can tell you that while I'm
But again, remember what charters are. So when the state doesn't look at a law and draft it in such a way to apply uniformly to all cities, that gives you the ability to charter out of it. And so it may just be a piece of commentary on my part, but I think when the state I'm going to say this is probably commentary, but I think when a state thinks a law is important enough that everybody has to follow it, they make everybody follow it. And they,
yeah, no, it's 1953.
Yeah.
So 70 years. But I think that's exactly the idea behind home rule. Charter ordinance is home rule. You are not free to act if the legislature has enacted a statute that applies not only to you as a city, but uniformly to all cities. If it's not uniform, then that's there's room for local action. You didn't think this was important enough to make it apply to everybody in the same way, so we should have some home rule opportunities,
and so then it boils down to your choice, and your choice to follow the statute, your choice to modify it, and that's what home rule is about, is giving you that ability. So it's just a matter of where are you comfortable walking the line.
And I will add, because it may be an opportune time, as some council members are indicating what they might be interested in voting for or not. This requires a 2/3 vote of the entire governing body, including the mayor. So it's a supermajority to get one of these passed.
There's a couple discrepancies in the ordinance versus the certificate of whatever it's called, find it here. Certificate of compliance or whatever. The ordinance says 30 days protest. And the certification says no more than 60 days.
So, yeah, the 60 days applies to the charter. That's how it becomes effective. And then the 30 days, which I think maybe you're looking in section 3, that would be the protest period in the future. If the charter ordinance became effective after 60 days, then anything you do under the charter ordinance, except for the public, on the narrow one, except for the public works, would be subject to a 30-day protest period.
One of them says it takes 10% of the qualified voters, and the other one says 2%.
That is, the charter is 10%. And then you're right, if the charter became effective, and this is the narrow version of this, and you have a future project where you're going to use this, it would be subject to notice and protest, a 30-day protest, and a 2% protest. And we see a lot of different things in statutes. It's usually a 2% protest, a 5% protest, or 10% protest. And the 2%, again, I used it just because you have a charter ordinance. It's very similar to this already relating to bonds for wastewater system improvements. And so it could be anything. 2% is a much lower threshold, obviously, for successful protests than the 10% or the 5%.
Another question I have is both KSA 14-570 and 571 reference that for projects within the boundaries of the city. How do we get around doing bonds, issuing bonds for like the trails that are not in boundaries of the city limits?
You probably wouldn't use this. And part of the thinking is that that's part of the statute. And you should only have charter ordinances on the same subject as the legislation. So then you have this thought of, well, is this legislation about capital improvements within the city, or is it just about capital improvements that a city wants to pay for? And the way this is drafted, it sort of assumes this legislation deals with capital improvements within the boundaries of the city. And part of that ties into, it's got to be in your CIP plan. And again, maybe that's antiquated language because in 1953, everybody's CIP could only be within the boundaries, but it's a good question. And I would say this wouldn't be used for the trail unless those improvements were occurring within the boundaries, whatever those boundaries might be at the time.
And so, Kevin, when we discussed the trail project, when we did the previous authorization, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe the conclusion that we came to was the statute was essentially silent
Yes.
on what happens outside of boundaries. And
Yes.
so generally when statutes are silent, that's again another exercise of the home rule authority because the state hasn't set a guideline for you on how to do that.
Exactly.
So I believe when you did the original authorization, it was based on just that home rule authority.
Yes, which is called ordinary home rule. Legislature hadn't spoken to that at all, so you're free to make your own law. Legislature has spoken to this and described capital improvements within the boundaries of the city. And so, again, we didn't change that in this. I do think, and I'm glad we're talking about this, the Trails project may be outside the city. You wouldn't use this if it's outside the city. You'd use probably, again, pure home rule, ordinary home rule, where you're free to act. The legislature hasn't enacted any statutes that relate to cities financing trail improvements outside of their boundaries.
Well, both of these charter ordinances both say within the boundaries of the city.
Yes.
So is that what you're saying, that what you call them, this is either one of these two charter ordinances?
Yes. Either one of these will mean just within the boundaries.
So these guidelines apply to projects done within the boundaries. It doesn't create a guideline for a project outside of the city boundaries.
Right.
Again, each statute kind of has a limit in the way the state uses their language. And that's what we're saying is right now, the statutes are silent on what happens outside of the city limits, this one included. And so when you're looking at this charter, it is applying strictly within the boundaries, and it's not actually setting rules for what happens outside of the city boundary.
What does that do to our decision as far as bonding funds for the trail?
Status quo from where we were months ago, that's unchanged. And that's the same authority you would use in the future, which is still home rule. It's like a public health, safety, economic development sort of matter. You're really free to act in those matters where there's not a statute that governs you. So this won't impact both what you've already authorized for the trail or anything you might do in the future for the trail, unless it's trail improvements within the city limits. Then this would be an option.
Can you say that again?
It's I probably said too much. To answer your question, it doesn't impact that at all. This won't be used for trail projects. It won't impact what you've already authorized. Separate sort of legal authority and considerations in connection with how do we authorize bonds for the trail project if it's outside of the city.
So we'll have to take, for any further bonds we want to issue for the Trails project, we'll have to take another separate action.
Yes. I mean, an authorizing ordinance is what I call it.
To authorize spending bonds for areas not within the boundaries of the city.
That's the step you've already taken.
Right.
You took that
Yeah.
earlier this year to
But not
authorize.
for all of it.
Right. It was phase 1, phase 2 design, but yeah, I would agree. In the future, if the city is going to issue bonds beyond what has already been authorized for the trail project, then yeah, there will be another ordinance to authorize that. And that ordinance really only didn't describe phase 2 as to exactly what it was. So you would have another ordinance that says, maybe we've had a phase 1 and now we're interested in pursuing phase 2. And this is how it's described, and authorize bonds with.
But the thing you're looking at tonight, Ron, the only way that the trail gets in the mix related to this charter ordinance is if it's within the city limits. That's the only way this one would impact. And so, for example, essentially what Kevin is saying, we did an authorization, but you did it on a partial scope. You did it for phase 1 and then part of phase 2. So when it comes time to do the other part of phase 2 later, to do that other bridge, you will have another issuance. You will have another ordinance to authorize that issuance. But again, that's not related to this charter. Where this one would come into play is let's say we have to finish that last quarter mile to go from Walmart Lulu to the edge of city limits. That's still technically within city limits. So that couldn't be easily rolled into that bond issue because of this requirement. If you were using this statute and
Right.
And not, again, one of the things we talked about at a prior meeting was there's a lot of different statutes that authorize a lot of different directions, and there's not necessarily a singular way to get to a financing. And that's what you have bond counsel to help lay out for you is here's your different options based on your strategy, your different levels of comfort. So, but as a general statement, that's what you're looking at. The outside you've already done under an authority that exists because the state has not passed a statute that applies to it. That's the trail outside of city limits. This is something different.
Kevin, about the debt limits and stuff of this nature. If a city is running with a high debt limit already and something like this is changed, does it endanger this? I mean, making a city really, I know that you can't schedule hurricanes and you can't schedule tornadoes, but it seems to me like there's a little bit of control being lost, trying to keep a budget or debt ceiling at a specific level. And am I
Right.
thinking about that wrong?
No, to the extent this would create perhaps another exception to the debt limit for the city of Augusta on certain projects, then depending on the phrase you want to use, it's more flexibility. You can
To add to it.
Right. Now, this comes up relatively frequently. You have a statutory debt limit, and then you have a reality debt limit where the market will say, that's too much. You can't borrow anymore.
What if you're already running a little red anyway?
Well, that's,
You know.
I think both statutorily and the market might say, well, that's too much, or you might get dinged on your bond rating. I mean, the
Being
message
able
will
to
be
add new
sent.
projects in, and we got to have this one, and we're going to take this one. And it just seems to me a little iffy. And
So that's actually one of the things we discussed at the last meeting. I had shared that Dustin Avey, who is our financial advisor, I had posed that question to him. So when you do this charter ordinance, what are the impacts when a rating agency is looking at you? And he simplified it for me and basically just said, what matters is that you're issuing debt, not necessarily in the grand scheme of things when they're going to look at their rating, it's that you're issuing debt and how are you situated financially, and not so much what is your legal limit. It's just you have this much debt and you have these different ways of paying for it. So that's the way I would break this down is if you're proceeding with these projects at all, the rating agencies are going to look at it. And from Dustin's perspective, whether you have the charter ordinance that gives you that exemption from the debt limit or not, that's probably not going to impact their rating a whole lot because they're just going to see that you've added $5 or $6 million to your books.
But it could.
But our finance advisor is saying that that is not what he would say they're looking at.
Oh, well, but I'm just saying the fee structures will be higher if this, adding on later on.
The
if-
fee
if this
structures
would-
for what?
What he was explaining about going from 8 million to 800,000 on a cost of his side of the fees and things like that. There will be added things that will come into it with this change. If we were to do a larger project or something of that nature. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, it is more expensive. What I was trying to convey is it gets marginally less expensive.
The more you do?
Yeah, like, again, $800,000 issue is pretty expensive.
Right.
As a proportion of the size. And
Yeah.
no doubt an $8 million issue, using our examples, will be more expensive from a deal cost standpoint. But proportionally and marginally, if you look at those things, it's much less.
So if I'm trying to follow the thought process, if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, and I may not be, but if I am, I think it's working the opposite direction of what you're thinking. I believe what Kevin indicated is if that project gets bigger, that cost of issuance as a piece of the project is much, much smaller. There's efficiencies of having a bigger number than having a smaller project standalone, because they still have to do similar levels of work to a certain extent, and you're going to pay for that. So as that bond issue gets bigger, you just have some efficiencies in grouping some of those other things together.
It could still blow up your debt limit, though, is what I'm trying to make a point of.
Unless you
Whether
use
it's skinny or narrow. whatever
unless you
you're
use a
saying.
charter ordinance to exempt yourself from the debt
Right.
limit, which is what the action
I get the
is.
exemption part. I'm just,
So we should do this to save money. If
You
we're going to
you do
start
it
breaking them up.
you do it to preserve debt limit capacity in case you need it. That's what it does. It preserves the debt limit capacity in case you need it.
I make a motion that we accept number 2, an Arrow Charter Ordinance that exempts a large public works facility project from the statutory limit by preserving a petition process for the public. This all falls underneath of Charter Ordinance number 2224, exempting the city of Augusta, Kansas from the provision of KSA 14570 and KSA 14571, and providing substitute and additional provisions on the same subject relating to public public improvements and the issuance of bonds for the purpose of paying for said improvements.
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any other discussion that needs to take place before we call the roll? Okay, Erica?
Okay, Burke,
Yes.
Rivas,
No.
Richardson,
Yes.
Bailey.
Yes.
Skip Mike.
Oh, Mike, I'm sorry, Rawlings,
Yes.
Leffler,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Martin.
no,
That was 2 dissents. So I think that's,
And we had 6 affirmative then.
motion carries.
Okay.
And that was the narrow version, correct?
Yes.
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 Thank you, Kevin. I would really struggle to explain that on my own as I demonstrated at the first meeting.
Well, I appreciate the discussion. It's
explain it.
fairly
if I will. Thank you.
complex, and hopefully we walk away knowing this is a tool in the toolbox. If it becomes effective, It will get used for the public works building, and then, you know, who knows in the future, I'll be advising on the same thing, sort of, do you need debt limit capacity? Is there a better way to authorize these bonds rather than this charter ordinance? So thank you.
And Mayor and Council,
Thank you.
before Kevin steps down, can you speak on one further item, which is kind of the next step after this? So there's the timeline for the charter ordinance to become effective. We have the proposed bond issuance hanging out there. So we're going to be in a holding pattern for roughly like 90 days or so before that can
Yeah.
move forward.
Yeah, so
right?
this will be published twice. And then that starts the 60-day protest period. So that's how we kind of get to the roughly 90 days, a little less than that. If it becomes effective, then it can be used for the upcoming bond issue or temporary note issue. If it doesn't become effective, then, you know, we're back to talking about the public building statute I referenced earlier and other options. But it's, in terms of this being effective and being used for the public works project, it's, you know, 90 days minimum.
So the timeline for us getting to an issuance won't necessarily change depending on the outcome of a petition or a vote or anything like that. It just,
Right.
if it's affirmative, then we'll have this process. If it's not, you'll have other process, but you'll still be around the same timeline to proceed with your
Right.
projects.
Yeah, and that's a great place to, you have options, which I think is good for our clients. You have options, and no matter whether this becomes effective or not, your bigger plans for projects can still proceed.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks.
Mr. Mayor, it's 8:15 by the time on the clock. Can we take a 10-minute break, returning at 8:25?
Do I hear a second?
Second the motion.
Got a motion and a second to take a 10-minute break and return at roughly 8:25. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. to the regular meeting. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay. We're on item 5, discussion direction regarding establishing a common consumption area. So, staff?
Yes, Mayor and Council, this item on the agenda tonight it's a presentation item. It's a discussion direction. So it's an opportunity for you to hear about an initiative that Go Augusta has been working on. They've been speaking with the downtown businesses. They reached out to city departments, Department of Public Safety being one of them, and trying to talk through an opportunity to do something that other communities have found beneficial to their downtown districts. And it's this thing called a common consumption area, and it's based off some new legislation that the state has passed in recent years and how that's evolved. And I'd like to turn it over to Jamie Chapman, Executive Director of Go Augusta, to talk through all the background training she's gone through and kind of pitch this idea and what they think it might do for the downtown.
Good evening. Thank you, Mayor Rawlings, City Council, City staff. Thank you for letting me speak to you about this tonight. This is something I've been working on for quite a long time, actually. We've done a lot of research into this to see how it would fit in with Augusta. So defined as the common consumption area by the Kansas Department of Revenue, it's an area permit that allows the consumption of alcoholic liquor and cereal malt beverages in the area designated by such permit. So this is specifically a defined area where beverages can be consumed outside of a particular retailer's location. And again, with this, only participating retailers located inside the common consumption area would be allowed to provide the beverages that would be allowed for common consumption. A lot of misconceptions come to we can bring our cooler down. This is specifically geared towards our current alcohol retailers and being allowed to shop, sip, walk around, visit other things, primarily to grow our business and make it somewhat of a destination that no place around us currently has. So we're proposing to utilize the current designated Main Street district as the boundaries for the downtown common consumption area, which we'd also like to call the Red Brick Social District. The common consumption ordinance would help us further our goal to become a destination location while providing another quality of life benefit for our community. You should all have a copy of a proposed ordinance that we've been working on. I worked with 14 different communities in and outside of the state of Kansas, looking at what they utilize, what works best for them. So we've kind of come up with what we think would work best for us. But since you have the copy of the ordinance, I'd be happy to go into questions about it in a moment. But I kind of want to get with you to show you the research that we've conducted on this and how it could be a big benefit to our businesses and retailers. So if we can go to the slideshow, and you all have copies there, in March of 2023, the National Main Street organization hosted their conference in Boston. And one of the topics was common consumption. And so they asked Rome, Georgia, next slide please, which is a Great American Main Street Association. They currently have a city population of over 38,000, so they're quite a bit larger than us. 300 plus businesses downtown, and a lot of their upper floor housing has been completed. So this was kind of their story with this. So the things that we really looked at is research. I'm kind of dedicated to making sure we're doing the right thing for not only ourselves, but the community, feedback from other people, and education to our people. We've spent a lot of times over the last few months researching what other current cities have, what other cities and other states have, speaking with the Director of Public Safety. We kind of wanted to make sure we got a good idea of what we're looking at for this. So with the feedback, we went ahead and polled all of our downtown businesses. This was kind of a helping from not only Go Augusta, but volunteers to help do this. Sean visited all of our downtown businesses. There are 44 total, and we wanted to know how they felt about it. Either a yes, no, or I don't care, as many of the businesses downtown would not necessarily be affected by this. So with that, we have 44 businesses downtown, 34 were a yes, and 10 were not able to be contacted as of that date. We had overwhelming support for this, being able to have a little bit more freedom and control over some events that we would like to participate or have happen downtown. And then, of course, on education, we want to make sure that everybody is following the rules and doing what they should be doing. So we'll be working with restaurants, the community, and things like that to know what the actual rules and regulations are. So currently in Kansas, there are 23 cities that utilize a common consumption area. Wichita only has one, and that's only used during their Oktoberfest. So we did a pub crawl. Actually, Sean did a pub crawl this spring, which was a tremendous hit, and people were able to go inside but would not be able to leave at that point with a beverage. This would basically allow them to go to Shane's and grab a beer and then maybe shop at Marketplace for a while, then stop by Bricks and have another, and basically enjoy your time downtown, socializing, enjoying the businesses that we have, and especially during other certain events, just to be able to kind of have a little bit more freedom with that. So the next closest would be in Wellington. No other place has the common consumption ordinance in place. They have it started in 2019. In July of 2023, they removed the barrier restrictions so that you can have it with a shown barrier. So like, for example, a signage or big pink dots painted on the street, so that's determining where your area is beginning and ending. So again, this would let us be on the forefront of change for something that no place around us has, including Wichita. With the addition of new breweries coming into town as well, and M&J Coffee House, offering adult coffees and so forth like this, it would be a real benefit to our community. So they also provided us with some examples. This one is a chief of police in Carrollton, Georgia. And this kind of goes through what they had and what we've looked at. We wanted to be proactive in avoiding potential problems. So we wanted to learn from others. Okay. We fashioned the ordinance to meet the needs of our community while keeping public safety in mind. A lot of times people have it open until 2 a.m. Well, we know nothing good happens after midnight. So we're proposing that it be for Thursday, Friday, and Saturday only from 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. People were asking, how do you police this? Really, what we're planning on doing is policing it ourselves. We have enough stake in the community that the businesses that want to participate don't want to have this be a problem. So we will be participating and monitoring what is happening as well. I don't foresee this being any different than any usual weekend night. So with the next one, this is from the same chief. Since we relaxed our alcohol ordinance, alcohol-related arrests have gone down from 2.25 a month to 1.25 a month. It's just showing that people can be responsible when they are given the chance. So the next slide Josh already showed you is the proposed. This is already the designated Main Street district. So without having to remap everything, this would then be what we would propose as the red brick social district or common consumption area. So when we go to an economic development standpoint from this, this is a city in Woodstock, Georgia of approximately 37,000 in population. They said slightly more litter, which they added additional grounds crews. They've had this in place since 2016 with no records of increased tickets or policing interactions. With this, we're asking the participating businesses to help ensure the cleanliness of our red brick social district. And if additional help is needed, then Augusta will form a volunteer cleaning crew if needed. We're not asking the city to do any additional tasks. We will take care of that ourselves. And then Mayor John Howard of Monroe, Georgia. Monroe is a population of approximately 15,000, so they're a little closer to us. Our downtown sales during the first quarter of the year beat our local Walmart. That's pretty awesome. I can't give you one single ordinance change that has had a more positive benefit to our downtown vibe. When people exercise their freedoms in Monroe, they tend to more fully support our businesses while fully enjoying themselves. In fact, our downtown sales during the first quarter of the year beat our local Walmart. As mayors and council members, it is incumbent upon all of us to have a healthy downtown local business community. We will do everything in our power to help our restaurants succeed, which in turn helps the neighboring businesses flourish. Finally, due to our relaxing of our open containers within our entertainment district, we have not had one negative issue with law enforcement. So in this next slide, it doesn't tell us specifically what the businesses were. They kept these anonymous, but With the trial results, retailer A had a 28% increase in revenue over the prior year, and retailer B had over 95%. It really helps people to shop around when they feel more relaxed. So they're showing the results from 22 to 23. The first restaurant had a 30% increase. Restaurant B had a 51% increase in food sales and a 29% increase in alcohol sales over last year. Depending on the retail location and what they sell, one had over 400% increase over the prior year. So it's just showing there has been significant improvement in sales when people are allowed to have a little bit more freedom with that. So a lot of times, these are some of the frequently asked questions there that we have made sure to address in our proposed ordinance. Can people bring their own beverages from home and keep it in their trunk? No. The specifics that we have in the ordinance state that the only persons that can have alcohol, they must be in a provided 16-ounce or smaller disposable cup with the logo of the selling retailer. We want disposable cups. We don't want you to refill the cups. They are disposable. They will be trashed as soon as they're finished. And another one is this going to allow people under the age of 21 to drink? No, this is no different than what it currently is. If Shane's going to sell a drink to someone, he is going to ID them. So at the time of the purchase of the drink is when they're getting ID, just as it is currently. And again, this is something that we will also help police because, again, if we are allowed to do this, we want to make sure that people are following the rules. So on the next slide, there's a couple of frequently asked questions that I kind of touched based on. I kind of asked around, what are some questions that you would have? What are some things that you might be concerned with if this was something that you were considering? So the first one being, what if a business doesn't want people coming in with alcohol? That's perfectly fine. There may be some businesses that don't want that. And what we will do as Go Augusta is provide stickers on the windows that will either say, yes, you can come in. We are part of the Red Brick Social District, or please, we ask that you not come in with alcohol. It's as simple as that. What if I bring my Yeti cup downtown? I've heard that a lot. I'm sure we've all seen that a lot. So no outside containers of any sort will be allowed. Just like if I was to go into Shane's with my Yeti cup, even if soda, he wouldn't like that. So again, we're going to be keeping an eye on this as well. No bottles, no cups that aren't specifically labeled are going to be allowed in these businesses. And then how will this be enforced? Like I said, we are adamant on making this happen and doing it in a safe way. So we want to make sure that you're aware we have a large group of businesses downtown that are willing to work on the policing of it. We have volunteers who are also willing to, help keep an eye out and to make sure people are doing the right thing. So I think the most important question y'all are concerned about is, what are we asking of the city of Augusta? We are asking for no money. Insurance fees and applications will be paid for by Go Augusta. We have looked into, Shane has been responsible for doing the research on insurance that would be needed for a common consumption district. It would run approximately $5,000 a year. We will be paying for that through different advertising channels so that this would not be a request of the city to pay for anything. So we initially looked at doing it for the remainder of the calendar year. However, if this is something that we can do, nothing really comes up again until next spring. That's, we will definitely add events and so forth, but once it gets cold, it gets a little more difficult than people wanting me to be outside. Like I mentioned, can cups be reused or refilled? No, they will be plastic cups. We don't want to have the fancy cups that you can take home and want to use. You're getting the red Solo cup with some stickers on it because we want people to then say, we go to Shane's, he can't refill that cup. He will sell you a new cup. So that's going to key down on, okay, we're going to go out and refill these items. And then how do I know the boundaries of the Red Brick District? This one, we're kind of open to. Should be a picture on the right there, Josh, of what Shawnee, Kansas has done. They've utilized more permanent chalk paint that says this is what can happen. We can also put it at eye level, potentially on signage. It can be on trash cans that are strategically placed. We're kind of open to however council thinks so it would be best for us to have the area marked off so that people are aware. So that's kind of a general idea. I'm going off of that. You've already kind of read through the ordinance and maybe you have questions, but if you haven't had a chance to, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Jamie, how does it work on approving events? Is something that the city council still has control over which events that this can be used at, or who has control over this event can use it?
It'll be the same as it is currently for events. So if it is an event that doesn't require a street closure. So one of my ideas would have a sip and shop on Thursday evenings where people can come downtown. The goal is to keep our downtown businesses open later. That's always been a complaint, and we want to have that as an option. Where we're not closing the streets, it would be no different. The times would still be as they are. If the street is asking to have a closure, then it would come before council just as always. The one thing that we put in there is, let's say that maybe the car show ended at 11, for example, and that's what time the band got over. We did allow for council to be able to make those adjustments if they wanted to make it a little bit later or something like that. But the standard would be, Thursday, Friday, Saturday from 11 a.m. to 10 p.m.
Now, I don't know if you want to speak on this or let the chief speak on it. I was just curious how our safety department has felt about it or how they've been involved in the discussion.
Sure, Chief, would you mind?
Well, the chief's coming here. Can people have water bottles?
Yeah.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean there's water in them, but that's kind of.
Yeah, that was one of our,
It is now.
that was one of my concerns when we were meeting with Josh and the committee at Shane's, was we don't have the staff to chase around somebody with a bunch of Yeti cups in their hands and stuff. But I can see it working. My worry was, what if we do have the car show and they bring in their own coolers? We're saying you can't bring alcohol from home. That's when they have to come back before you, the way I understand it, to get approval to be able to do that. Because, car show, there's coolers everywhere. And I'm the one that send a team down, start writing tickets to everybody. That kind of kills the vibe of a car show pretty quick. I think you start doing that. But there's got to be ways for doing all that. But it's really no different than when you have events down there now and they're allowed to drink up and down the street. You're just making it a permanent thing. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, every weekend, with limitations of time and area they can carry it. The state of Kansas already pulled the rabbit out of their hat and took the barriers away. Now they're leaving it up to you to decide what you want to do for paint or signs as well. So we knew it was coming. It just took a better time to get it done. Now we have to find a way to control it. So,
have you visited with any other police departments on that has this in place now and how they're getting along?
I haven't. I don't think there's any. You said there's no other in the state?
No, there's 23.
Oh, there's 23 in the state. No, I have not.
So, Chief, one of the things we talked about is that time restriction that was actually in there. So that kind of came at your recommendation with us focusing on the narrow time and after hour stuff never seems to pan out well. So that was a direct recommendation from the department. And yeah,
it was, because some places, if you get an event, will stay open like 2 a.m. or something. But it was Shane's on you guys. You're closed what, 9 o'clock? And the only thing you got left open is one bar down there is all at the Bricks. And that's why I asked for a time limit, because anything after about 9, 10 o'clock, you're into power drinkers. And that's nothing but a problem for me to deal with when you're into power drinking. So,
Does that add any extra liability to the business owners that are going to be policing or whatever you called it? I mean,
you would have to speak to an attorney on that. We do what we do every day, no matter if it's an event or not. Nothing changes for us. We just learn
and you have a badge to stand that, you're legally able to do that, right?
We're legally able to enforce any law issued by the state, federal, or the council. You bet.
And we're legally able to call them if we see that there's a problem.
Well, yeah.
Oh yeah, places have bouncers. Bouncers aren't supposed to touch anybody either. But Shane knows. He calls us. We're there quickly. Or Bricks or any of them. We've been places already. That's what we do for a living. So nothing really new to us. So, what I do like is if you guys create this, it gives us rules that they have to abide by. That gives us some teeth to use when we're enforcing those rules. It takes the guessing out of our work.
I would like to mention that during any Go Augusta sanctioned event, there will not be outside alcohol allowed. The reason we want this to pass is to benefit our businesses, is to benefit the breweries, the people having concerts, the small shops. We're not here for people just to come down and drink. The only reason we want this is for simply to benefit the businesses. So during any Go Augusta event, it will not be allowed. You're asking about the policing of that. No, we can't necessarily force people to do it, but have you ever heard from me? People get scared. The goal is, though, hey, they're gonna know you're not messing this up for the rest of us. We want to take care of this. And Chief already knows, we'll call him in a second. I call him all the time. He hates it. Hey, this is what's going on. So not that we'll be the ones policing or throwing out people, but we will be the ones watching. And if it becomes a problem, hey, guess what? We know the right people to call. Any other questions? I know y'all have some questions.
I'm just kind of curious on why you guys decided on the disposable cups and not letting the businesses do like special cup, because I can refill a disposable cup out of my trunk just
You
as easily
can.
as another one.
Absolutely. But the chance of you taking it home and bringing it back are a little more slim if you've got a solo cup that lasts you for the evening. That's something that some places do is, again, has a Main Street cup that you can purchase. But then what's the difference between you coming out that we're not letting you refill it anyway? So the only way you're going to refill it is not legally. So again, our goal is not for people to just be able to freely drink, but to benefit the businesses. So if I have to go back to Shane's and get a whole new cup, we're making sure that Shane's getting that business. Or
Maybe
Brixton's
I
getting
didn't catch it, Jamie, but I thought you said that the disposable cups would have a sticker on or something.
Correct.
So it wouldn't be just anybody's solo cup.
Right. No, absolutely. They have to provide a logo or sticker, something. It has to have their name on there. So it's not just going to be a solo cup and Shane written his name on there. It will be a type of cup limited to 16 ounces that has a specific sticker or logo that says, I got this from Shane's, I got this from Bricks. So we can kind of, keep an eye on what's happening as well. And that is state law.
They can go back into Shane's or Bricks and get it refilled?
No.
Or no?
And they cannot get refills. You have to buy a new cup. So you can't go to Shane's and then try and get your cup refilled at Bricks. You can't go back into Shane's and try and get it refilled. You must get a new cup every time.
But you will be able to get it filled up, take it out, walk on the street.
And then go to Bricks and finish it and then get another beer from Bricks. Yep. With a new cup every time. Absolutely.
Well, I think this would really go over big if you had free refills.
I thought so too, but Shane wouldn't go for it for some reason. So this isn't just related to cereal malt beverages. This is also related to, like, I want a glass of wine. Again, you all have a 16-ounce cup. It's the largest you can get. So let's say I want a bucket of rum. It's probably not going to fit in a 16-ounce. So we'll have to adjust that. But again, we didn't want it to be crazy. We wanted it to be reasonable, but to also have that if it's not just somebody who wants to have a beer, they could have a glass of wine or a rum and Coke or whatever they so prefer.
I mean, I like the idea. I think we need to bring more things downtown. I know everybody knows where I stand with it, but I just think it's something for Augusta. I mean, we're seeing the numbers. It looks like it's going to boost the business. Car show was great. I went down there Saturday and everyone was having fun, but it was, I had a beer at Bricks, I had a beer at Shane's, and I had a beer at the bowling alley. And it would have been nice to sit in there and have, half my beer and walk out and start looking at the cars and walk in. But I had to sit in there the whole time.
Right.
With that beer and finish that beer before I get back out to the festivities. And, they had a great car show down there. And I don't know. I felt like that wall border when you see everybody else drinking on the outside is just silly.
Right.
And I like the cutoff times. I think 10 is
Yeah.
perfectly fine. I don't know. I agree. You don't need people at 1 o'clock down there
No.
stumbling around drinking beer. I think most people are having their dinner. They're going to go have a drink. They're going to get out dinner at 7. They're going to have a drink, talk to their friends. And by 10, they're wrapping up if they're the people we're looking for downtown.
Right.
Well, if we're wanting to make this a destination area, I think this is a great step forward to do that. So.
Yeah, I love that we're cutting edge on this. We will be the first. So
I
that's
agree.
kind of exciting.
Josh, did you have something?
No, my only comment was just going to be on kind of scheduling of this because it was kind of a new pitch for the idea. We wanted to give you a chance to ask questions if there's anything else you wanted us to research. I still would like to bring it back at the 21st meeting. just to finalize, get it, because I think there's a few things we want to do, just kind of put it in our format for the city, and we just kind of ran with it for now. But we did want to give you a chance to comment before we ran with that, to do any further work on it. So that would be my question, is if you have anything else that you want us to research, anything else that Jamie can provide to help, or any angles you want us to look at, and then we can put that into kind of a finalized draft for the next meeting for adoption. If you're
I just want to make sure the chief's involved with our rules. That way, like he said, it's very clear. That's not the cup that you're out, it may be a red one, we want blue ones. Whatever it is, it needs to be the right one. So they're not guessing, oh, is Shane doing a red cup tonight? Is he doing a blue cup? We know the cup, we know
Yeah.
the exact area, we know the exact time, we know the rules. So they're not, like you said, you don't want any guessing with stuff like this. You want to know it's right or it's wrong.
We don't want to make it more complicated than it
Exactly,
needs to be.
exactly.
But
Everybody
we
should
also
know.
want to make sure that we are respecting the public and their safety.
I agree.
Josh, do you need a motion for us to tell you to continue working on this and bring it back to us at the next meeting?
Not necessarily. I mean, as long as
Or
you
just give you
just have a
direction.
consensus tonight, you want us to work on it, we will have a finalized ordinance that you can adopt at the next meeting if you're comfortable.
I'm good with it.
I'm good with it.
Well, let's do it.
Don't
All
see any oppositions.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you all very much. I appreciate
Thank
it.
you, Jamie.
Thanks, Shane.
Let's go down to item 6, our nuisance abatement resolution for 506 North Osage Street. Staff?
Yes, Mayor and Council, I'm just going to go ahead and turn this item over to our code enforcement officer, Chris McNutt.
Good evening. This case began July 11th at 506 North Osage. There's been prior cases at this address the past year that I've had this position. The photos you see on the slides there were taken last Friday. When I began this case on the 11th, there was a tall wooden structure that was built out of scrap material. It's been salvaged from all over town. Metal, you name it, there's pretty much everything in that yard at this time. The recliner is the only thing that remains in the front yard from when the case began July 11th. But now, like I said, the tower has been torn down, but there's multiple other nuisances that have been added since then. Prior to tonight's, I went by and did a final exam just to see if anything had been improved upon, progress made. No, in fact, there's been even more things added since those photos were taken Friday. We have fiberglass slides that have been, look like they've come off of a pool somewhere, more trash, all kinds of other nuisance debris. I spoke to the tenants at that house last week. I asked if I would come by for an inspection when they were ready. I told them, contact me. Otherwise, I'll still plan on bringing this to council. As of the 7th, no calls were ever made. So again, they've done really nothing as far as removing any of these nuisances.
Chris, when you came to us before, was this the same people living there?
Yes.
Okay. I'll make a motion for approval of resolution number 2023-10, determining that a nuisance exists at 506 North Osage Street and ordering the removal and abatement of nuisance within 10 days as specified in KSA 12-16-17E.
Second it.
Got a motion and a second. Is there any other discussion?
On page 2 of the, whatever this resolution is, whatever it says that must be removed and abated from said property owner before the 16th day of January.
That's a typo on my part. I can
Okay.
correct that before it goes out.
Which section is that in, Ron?
It's on the very top of the second page. I don't know if it's got a section on it or not. Or it gives a
Page
legal
2, first
description.
paragraph, there at the bottom.
All right, so we'll get our dates updated on the resolution.
My apologies on that.
But who's ultimately responsible for this cleanup, the landlord or the resident?
It's basically falls upon the resident. at the time. The landlord has been notified as well, or attempted to be notified. I checked the USPS website. He has not accepted the certified letter. It is still waiting for him at the post office since the 13th of July.
Chris, it actually would go against the property owner.
It'll go
if we
against the
have to
property
abate
owner,
it.
yes.
If we have to abate it, the
Correct.
taxes will be,
I was
it'll be
getting to
added to
that.
the
The
taxes.
taxes would be, yep.
Generally, the landlord will require the tenant to, but if neither of them take action, we'll go back to the property owner.
Have we heard anything from him?
No, that's his standard operating procedure as well. He ignores all notices. He was also the same property owner that we abated at 1200 School twice.
Does he live in town?
No,
Yeah, I didn't think so.
outside city limits as far as I know.
This is 739 Southwest 100th. Be out near
Yes.
Purity Springs or Prickle Corner.
Okay. Any other questions? We've got a motion and a second on the floor. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you very much.
Hang on, I got a question for Chris.
Yes, sir.
How are we doing as far as like grass and vehicles, boats like that, things in people's yards? I continue to get quite a number of calls on residents that, the grass is growing up. I don't know what the deal is this year, but
There's been a lot of that this year. I get a lot of calls as well. It's some of the ones have been our frequent flyers. The way I've handled those is they usually get one of the door hangers for the first offense. After that, I go to the full-blown certified letter where that tells them in that letter, they do not get any further notices after that. If it gets to the 12-inch, we just automatically have it abated.
same with vehicles and.
Vehicles, that's a little bit touchier. A lot of times what I've done is I try and work with the folks to get them removed. They'll put them in the street. Somebody says something about that, then you get moved back in the yard. It's kind of a never-ending battle as far as vehicles go.
Now, if they're not tagged and they're in the yard, they're in violation, right?
Correct. I try to tell them they need to get them tagged, get them covered, get them back inside of a enclosed structure, garage, something like that. That way, you just don't leave them outside.
Even if they're under a car cover.
Generally, the way it works, if I can't see the tag, I don't have the authority to go up and actually lift a car cover.
Okay.
If the license plate's been concealed, I'm not able to. A lot of people have gotten hip to that.
All right, thank you. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, item 7, electric utility financial policy, staff.
Yes, Mayor and Council, he's been sitting back there waiting patiently, so I'd like to go ahead and invite him up. Mr. Jim Sutton, Power Plant Superintendent. So the action item tonight is on an electric utility financial policy, but it's part of a bigger initiative that our electric crew is working on. And so I would like Jim to be able to speak about that initiative and why we're doing it before you look at the actual policy discussion itself. So Jim, can you explain the RP3 process and why we're interested and what are we doing to try to achieve that designation?
Yeah, the RP3 process, reliable public power
provider.
Thank you. And I drew a blank there. It's quite a lengthy application. It goes over 4 sections. Each section takes approximately 25 points in it, each section. Workforce development, safety, education, and system improvement. I don't know exactly how to explain it. There's a lot of work to go in for this particular item. You're looking at is 2 points. I've written 6 policies for the electric utility, lightning arresters, vegetation, wildlife protection, an education policy. I can't think right now, and that was worth 4 points max. So AEDs, You can get 1 point if every facility in the utility has an AED. That means every truck, even though the trucks are single-person trucks. So they get half a point if we have one AED. The education policy is worth 2 points. Job succession is worth 5 points. So if we have a policy on job succession. It's just, like I said, it's just quite lengthy and quite involved. Two of us are working on it. We have multiple hours in trying to write everything, make sure we've headed in the right direction. There are 6 cities in the state: Wellington and Winfield, Ottawa, KCBPU, Garden City. Drawing a blank on the 4th one now, or the 6th one, excuse me. So.
And so that's some of the what that we're doing. So let's speak a little bit to the why. If you remember back, we haven't actually done this program in a couple of years, but one of the things that I wanted to work on and spend a lot of time working on in the budget process was the GFOA Distinguished Budget Award. And one of the reasons I was interested in that is it's a recognition, one, but two is just a process of verifying that you are a professionalized entity at that particular function that's being accredited. Okay, so we achieved that designation in a budgeted process. During our budget work session this year, Chief talked about the accreditations that are coming down, kind of as federal requirements, things that we're going to have to do for policing. It's a professionalization process, making sure that you have your operations in order, you have your people and policies and practices in order, so that if you meet that designation, you can say that you're in that upper echelon of those types of utilities and operations. And this is that for the electric utility. And it's something for the staff to take pride in, something for them to work on. When we promote to recruit people and you get to say that you're one of only 6 or 7 municipal entities in the state that have achieved that designation, you're setting a standard, you're setting a floor. And that's something that got me excited. It's a project that they offered up and wanted to take that on because they wanted to elevate their stature. And I'm fully supportive of that effort. So anyway, that was some of the why behind it that got me interested, and I appreciate all their effort to get to this point. And so I guess that brings you to the staff report tonight. This electric utility financial policy, what I would say about it is it's not necessarily committing you to anything that you don't do currently, but it is formalizing that and just stating our general practices of what we would do currently. References our minimum fund balance requirements. As you may recall from some of our budget work sessions over the years, that's a standard we've generally followed anyway for GFOA and budgetary reasons, but it's just acknowledging that in a policy. Audit requirements. You just did an audit tonight. The electric utility is already audited. This is just stating that that's going to be a regular practice of ours. We just completed a cost of service study with KPP. That's probably the newest, if you want to call it, commitment that's in this, but it's a practice we should be doing to regularly review rates and make sure that it's meeting our needs and evaluating that. And we went a long time without doing that until KPP got involved. So this is committing us to at least doing a regular evaluation every 5 years or so. And the rest of it, again, is just following a lot of practices we already kind of do. It's just not formalized on paper. So with that, I'll turn it over to council for any questions, consideration.
Some of the reporting and compliance. Jim, you guys have been doing that for 15, 20 years, probably, maybe longer.
Yes, we've been doing this. We just need something in writing stating that we do it.
Josh, in the purpose paragraph, what does relevant stakeholders mean? It's the last sentence.
So you're a public entity, and it's a public utility that serves customers. And so a lot of the financial policy is related to accountability. It's related to transparency, documentation of process. And so your accountability is to those stakeholders, the ones impacted by those choices that you make on rates, by the policies and practices you put in place to be good stewards of their utility money. So I would say that just your general customers are you as a governing body, as a board who oversee this utility. You have a stake in how this plays out and making sure that staff is delivering a high quality product to customers. So you would be relevant stakeholders as well. And then that goes out to, I think, all of the regulatory agencies, everybody else that we interact with. We're part of a grid. We're part of a pool and interact with other utilities. So we are setting a standard for ourselves in terms of how we deliver to the pool as well, and responsibility for everybody connected to that grid. So that's how I would define relevant stakeholders.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I'll make a motion to approve policy number 2023-01.
Second.
Got a motion and a second to approve policy number 2023-01, establishing an electric utility financial policy. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you for your work on this, Jim.
Thank you. Item 8, ordinance number 2224, establishing requirements for following designated truck routes and penalties for violation thereof. Staff.
Yes, Mayor and Council, at a prior meeting, there was an inquiry from council regarding our truck routes, the designated penalties. Kind of a question was raised on how are we performing in what we had established as a goal of trying to cut down on truck traffic on our non-designated routes, primarily Ohio Street, but really just anything that's non-designated. And I guess the concern was raised that the fines are not enough of a deterrent by virtue of our own observation that we still see a ton of truck traffic out there. And so council raised the question of whether we should consider increasing those fines. We did get some feedback from the prosecutor on this, and there was a couple of suggestions that came out of that conversation, depending on if you want to slow roll this and do some incremental changes, or if you want to make a bigger jump and go straight to more like of a heavy-handed deterrent. In either case, the recommendation is to get signage added regarding the fines, because right now our signage just warns that it's a no truck route. But the thought from the prosecutor was if the fines themselves were more explicit, they would be a better deterrent than what you have right now, where the truck drivers may not find out about it until they've actually been ticketed. And so there was a suggestion that you could consider just adding the fine signage and see if that makes any kind of difference, or adding the fine signage and also adjusting the fines to a level that you thought was more of a deterrent. So right now, you have an ordinance on the books, and it has a progression to it. It starts with the first violation at 250, the second at 500, steps up to 1,000, and then 2,500. I would still recommend staying within that parameter, but you can, in terms of like kind of capping at that 2,500. But the way that you do those steps, there's a lot of flexibility now. You could structure that. So rather than me drafting a whole bunch of different ordinances with a bunch of different numbers, I figured we would just have a conversation. My thought, if you were keeping it easiest, because I think that we had kind of settled on that $500 number a little bit on the last meeting, even though you didn't vote on it, but you could just mirror your first violation and second violation and then keep the rest of that structure if you wanted to do that. So you'd have a 500, 500, and then it steps up 1,000 and 2,500. If you want to change this and eliminate some of those tiers, you can do that, but we did implement the tier structure based on feedback we had from the prosecutor and from the judge previously. So it's open for discussion tonight. If you're keeping this structure, then it's just a matter of telling us what number to plug in, and then I would be comfortable with you authorizing the ordinance just with whatever number you would want to plug in. If you want us to change it, depending on scope of the change, I might have to bring that back if you want to change the whole tier structure. So with that, I'll turn it over to council for discussion, see what you want to do on this ordinance.
Josh, I like raising it, incrementally, starting at $500, but I also like adding the sign out there that says what the fine is. I mean, those truckers know when it says no through commercial traffic, that probably means you're gonna get a ticket, but it doesn't hurt to put the fine up there. The only other question I have is, do we need one at, somewhere off of 400, whether it's on Main or Main and Ohio? I don't see it very often, but once in a while, we have a truck that will come northbound from there.
It probably wouldn't hurt.
Yeah, I think the only no truck sign is hanging on this traffic light pole at 7th and Osage.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's not very big either.
No.
I don't. So there's a lot of different ways that trucks could turn off of 400. So that's probably one of the weaknesses of the strategy. But I mean, I think obviously Main Street, Osage is going to be probably the heaviest traveled, but that's not going to catch them at Lulu if they make that turn, or State or some of those other ones. So I would like some feedback. Do you want to have that signage at every one of those, or just the one that we think is probably most traveled?
I personally think the one that's most traveled, but, they all end up in Ohio because it's the only way in and out of town from the north. That's the bottom line. That's where they end up at.
I think we need to go a little further north of 70th with the warning sign, because they only have a couple hundred feet there to decide where they go. I've seen trucks stop south of 70th, and I think they realized that they made a whoops, but then they have the decision to make. Am I going to try to turn this big thing around, or am I going to risk getting the ticket? So
I don't see nothing wrong with moving it a little further north too. Problem is, we've got, what's the word I want to use? Violators that are doing it more than once. That's one of our biggest problems.
Repeat violators.
Yeah, repeat. Thank you. It's a complicated word.
I was gonna say the minimum fee is 500 and the next stage is 750. And
1,000, 2,500.
Or we go 5,015.
is there a
yeah, you could do that.
traffic sign standard as far as notification of truck routes? Are we following that? If
From what I
someone would
understand was
challenge
these
that?
were actually pulled from El Dorado's area where they're not for the same signage, size and all. They're 3 by 4 feet. They're huge. And there's more than one sign. There's one right there as you see in that picture. And then north of there is another one just south of the housing complex. So there's two warning signs before you get to 70th. Now, I don't mind if you want to say go north of what the housing addition is up there and put one. I see no problem with that at all, but I would agree if you up the fine, which I hope you do, I would like to see the fines underneath as well. I think it's a
And
pretty
maybe
good
even
deterrent
put
when
a
you see
flashing
that.
yellow sign on it or something.
What's that?
Maybe even a flashing yellow sign or something.
You could, a lot of people do put those single flashing yellow to get their attention. I think the more you do to prove it's a warning, the less our prosecutors are going to have to go to trial.
And that was one of the things that Justin had indicated, that he has taken several of them to trial
Sure.
recently. Or
I think some people count on, they'll go to trial to see if you'll just drop it or do something, but. I don't
Hey,
think
you
he's
say
gonna
he
do
takes
that.
them to trial, but are we winning?
I don't know the answer to that.
Yes.
I didn't
Yes.
dive that deep.
Yes, we are.
Okay.
I mean, it's kind of hard to contest it when you blew right through 2 signs before the intersection.
Good.
So, but I would agree, put the fine up there. That'd probably get their attention more than trying to read those 3 big lines right underneath that quick.
Is there something that can be added to Google Maps or something that?
They've tried to add it to Google Maps, and for some reason it will not accept it yet. The court's been trying to do that for a while, is what Stephanie told me. But they're still working on it, they said.
The 70th, an arrow to turn.
An arrow for 70th?
What's that?
Put an arrow on the sign that shows to turn, to turn right there at
The only way I wanted, I didn't know where that is still outside the city and that's not our road. Can we designate that trucks go this way, or will we end up in the same situation if they do damage as we did with our little bypass when we did Ohio Street? If they can ever get an agreement with the county of making that a truck route, that's golden. I love that thought, but that's not me doing that.
And that is a possibility down the road, isn't it, Josh, when we do the joint effort on Dyke Road?
Could be.
Or run them
There-
clear to
there-
Santa Fe Lake.
Yeah,
Road.
there'll be logistics to that. The county wasn't necessarily involved in that conversation, but that was, I think, part of the township's interest is the idea of having something that could move trucks around. When we talked about it a year or two ago, but I'm not going to commit on their behalf right now without further conversations.
Well, the sign's already telling them to detour on Southwest 70th.
Yeah, it actually, that's a good point, actually, it does. Well, that just says both 5W, that doesn't, sorry.
That's south.
I'm making a joke about how blurry it is. Yeah, that does look like it says Southwest 70th Street, so it does kind of designate already.
We gotta be careful designating a truck route.
Well, I'm curious because I believe when Cody and Anthony had worked on this before, we were coordinating with the county though, because I think we had to ask them to put additional signage up outside of the city limits. So that may have been something they coordinated and did. But I have to provide verification to that because it's not something I worked on before. It was staff that's no longer here. So if that is their signage, we'll ask them. And if they've already designated it, hey, can we throw an arrow on there? It doesn't bother me any.
Yeah, if we put another set up by, say, 65th Street up there north of that housing, wouldn't be a bad idea. Just
Yeah.
farther up, gives them a while to think about it before the last two show up.
Yeah, so I would agree. Whatever number you decide, that the fine signage makes sense to me. So now it boils down to what numbers would you like to plug in as the fines themselves?
I say if you don't up it now and you decide to up it later, but you buy the signs, you're gonna buy another set of signs if you decide to up it later.
I think we ought to go with 500, 1,000, and 2,500 and post it on the signs like your picture shows up there, Josh.
So 2,500 at third and then fourth. So it just takes 3 steps to get to the 25. Yeah.
I don't think we need to get too carried away.
Leave it 3.
Is it much trouble to change it to just 3?
So what I would do is, I guess the motion tonight then would be to approve the ordinance with the 3 tiers at 500, you say 1,000, 500, 1,000, 2,500, and eliminate section 2. Eliminate section B4? Yeah, B4. So let me see if I can.
Yeah, if you're a habitual driver, it's gonna get pretty expensive pretty quick. To an answer to Mr. Huddleston's question that one night, last night we were here, can that new flock system do a truck count? It cannot. It records them all. We'd have to count them all by hand to see. Now, we can't say we have a truck trailer. We can go back and see if it's been there before and do habitual that way, but we have to have the trailer number. But it cannot do an all count by itself.
Chief, I reached out to the court clerk a couple days ago when we were looking at when you guys were looking at this, just to ask her if they're seeing a lot of repeat. And she said they're not seeing a lot of repeat drivers, but repeat carriers. And that's the problem. We're still going to continue to see those same carriers as long as it's not the drivers.
More than one driver has told the officers that our company will pay $250 so we don't have to reroute around. That's why I asked $250. You got to go up to 5 and may make them carriers think again once we start doing it. I don't know. I'd have to ask the attorney. There's, from what I understand, you can only ticket the driver. There's no way to ticket the company, is there? Because it's like a parking violation. It's hard to fight because you got to prove who parked the car there. But otherwise, I'd say even go up higher if you're going after the companies. I think this right here would get some major attentions, and drivers are going to find a different way to go.
All right, so Mayor and Council, what we would do is we'll go back and make this edit and then have the mayor sign it, but you could take action to approve the ordinance tonight as it's shown here, with tier B1 being $500, B2 being $1,000, B3 being $2,500, and eliminating tier 4.
How soon would that come into effect if we passed it tonight?
On publication in the city newspaper, which is the website.
Once those edits are made, I'll get them to Shauna to put on the website. So tomorrow,
It shouldn't take too long to get a sign made either, should it?
I wouldn't think so. With any signage that you do, we just have to make sure it's METCD compliant, so that we'll have guidelines on sizing and coloring, all that sort of stuff. So Anthony will have to do a little bit of research there. And then if we're adding signage to something out in the county, we'll just have to reach out to the county as well and do whatever we did last time. I just don't know.
Did you like Ron's comment? I think it was Ron that made a comment about putting the flashing yellow light up there, and the chief made a comment, that's just one more thing to make your case stronger.
It doesn't hurt my feelings at all. I don't know if there's anything guideline wise that would prevent us from doing it occasionally, like especially if you're on like state highways and things like that. You probably have something that prevents that, but if it's not on the state highway, we may have some leeway. So we did it at Dearborn. We've left those flashing reds on the stoplights before, so we already have precedent for that. You throw them on there as a solar thing. It's not a huge deal, but I would say if the county approves it, we don't have any issue doing that.
You need all that put into motion?
Just say.
The signage, yeah, just say with the addition of the fine signage, but I would just approve the ordinance focusing on these tiers. The signage is something we should do anyway. And staff will just work on that piece.
Okay, we're approve the existing ordinance with the changes of the fines to 500, 1,000, and 2,500 in signage also to be added to the existing sign of the fines.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Any other questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Mayor, roll call.
Oh, it's a
Sorry.
roll call, yeah.
Um, Burke,
Yes.
Rivas, Richardson,
Yes.
Bailey,
Yes.
Leffler,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Martin.
Yes.
Motion carries.
The other thing I would say is we'll start enforcing it probably after the fine schedule, if the signs are up.
Say roll call.
That'd be all right with everybody. That way they know what the fines are when they're getting them. Thank you.
Just in my defense, it didn't say roll call on that one. Okay, number 9, fee schedule resolution number 2023-11. Staff.
Mayor and council, this is just a clarification. So our current fee schedule has a disinterment and reinterment fee established. What we've had happen recently, we've had 2 probably in the last year where it's been a cremation that is being disinterred and reinterred. And it doesn't actually require as much time or equipment, and it's kind of costly to do that. And right now, the one that we had recently was just an urn. Literally, they had to dig up an urn. And so this happened, I think, probably about 9 months to a year ago. And Cody made the decision at that point to charge half the rate, which is consistent with what we're doing with all of our other fees compared to a full body burial versus a cremation burial. And so we wanted just to formally establish that fee so that if it comes up again, we've got it established in the fee schedule.
So this is what Erica is referring to up here. So right above it in the gray, there is a
Burial language to it.
Yeah, sorry. Where's the closing fees?
Opening
There
and
it is.
closing fees.
Yeah, so the opening and closing fees, you can see up here that we have always kind of made that 50% distinction between cremations and caskets, at least in other sections. But for that one, we never did. And so when the issue came up, again, I don't like and rarely will ever do this of not following the fee schedule resolution, but it was explained to me that that was a direction provided by a previous staff member on that issue. And I think they just missed updating the recommendation. And because it happened recently, I didn't want to treat a customer different than someone that we had just treated. So that's certainly staff's error. And you can leave it as is, and we'll certainly accept that error. But I think that was an oversight on our part not to make that an official change. But based on the work involved, we think it should mirror that 50% model that we have on the other aspects of casket versus cremation. And so there's a couple different errors I think that we had in there, but I don't want staff making those sort of calls. I want you to make that official one way or another. But I'm just bringing it to your attention that why I kept it consistent with this latest one.
And I will tell you that these are extremely rare that we have a disinterment and a reinterment. So that's why it's not consistently come up before. We just have happened to have it twice in the last year. So.
I'll make a motion to approve the fee schedule resolution number 2023-11, establishing separate fees for the disinterment and reinterment of casket burials and cremation burials.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, matters from and for council. One thing we all have an invitation to the Augusta Department of Public Safety First Annual Banquet, Saturday night, August 19th at 6. And it's an RSVP to Kaylee at the Safety Department, Kylie.
Kaylee? Well done.
Then reminder, the skate park groundbreaking ceremony, August 11th, this Friday at Bill Reed Park at 9 a.m. And Eric, do you have anything else?
No, sir.
Ron?
I got a couple things. First, I think I heard Dave Warner say at our budget meeting the other night that he was going to do some work on the lights at State and 7th.
Yes.
If he did, the sequence is off, because if the lights at State are red for eastbound traffic, they turn green at Walnut, while the ones on State Street are still red. So you can't really turn or go off of Walnut. Hopefully that made sense.
Yeah, I'll ask him. I couldn't remember the timeline. He said if he was getting right on that, if it has changed or not. But regardless, I'll have him check on it.
Okay, and then second thing, I want to put on my WFO Car Club hat and just voice our pleasure with the city of Augusta, especially. Josh went out twice and helped get the speaker system switched over to the remote. Had ample trash cans down there, barricades, about anything that we wanted, the city provided. I was really impressed this year with the way the business community stepped out and opened up their doors and put stuff out on the sidewalk and did specials. The Lions Club, again, having their pancake feed, just everything just to make an event other than a car show. There was a lot of other things to do. Had about 240 cars registered. We always figure 25 to 30 cars that are too cheap to pay the $5 entry fee and host cars. So we figured probably 275. That's the most we've had in several years. I think our social media advertising helped that a lot this year. But all in all, it was a good day. People stayed around for the band. There's no complaints that I know of. I talked to a couple business owners. They all had a good day. We're very, very happy and very pleased with the amount of people that were walking around downtown. And we had a steady flow all day long. The heat was a little more bearable this year than it has been in the past. And it was just a steady stream all day. So just want to thank the community, thank the business district and the city for their support. That's all I got.
Kip?
We spoke earlier when we were talking about the budget hearing. I don't remember if we said the date and stuff. I mean, I know we spoke about that in our work session, but we might want to mention that so people know
It is
that.
September 5th at 7 PM here at City Hall
September 5th.
at the council meeting.
And we'll get those resolutions published online and really try to draw attention to that as well. Make people aware of that date and time.
And that'll be a Tuesday because Monday is Labor Day.
Correct.
Anything
Okay.
else?
Yeah, I just want to extend my appreciation to the electric department for the work they've done going to Ottawa and to Winfield last weekend to do the work there, helping
And I
them out.
apologize, I didn't get that information out to you. I found out that we had sent someone down there, and I didn't get that forwarded on. But yes, thank you.
Please share our appreciation to them and stuff for all they did. That's it. They did mention Augusta crew was one of them that was there on the news that helped with it and stuff. So kudos.
Cool.
Thank you.
Bob?
Yes, I just kind of want to update on vicious animal ordinance, how that's coming along.
I think it's still the same schedule we had before. What was the day you said it's going to P and Z plan? So for everyone at home, we have a couple of step process going on. There's a planning and zoning issue primarily related to chicken coops as accessory structures. That's going to the Planning Commission August 14th. And then we're expecting to be able to present the results of that to the council September 5th.
Thank you.
And sorry, it's more than chicken coops, but that's the thing holding up the rest of the animal control ordinance as well. That's what's coming back on the 5th of that whole ordinance.
Tom?
Josh, I was just wondering, what kind of a plan do we have in place at Garvin Park? We've got several dead trees, a lot of trees with dead limbs in them. With the winds and things we've been seeing off and on this summer, I'm kind of worried, somebody could get hurt out there. And I didn't know if our tree trimming crew had this on their schedule in the very near future or what.
Yeah, I'll follow up with them. I mean, it's been, I can tell you my thought and strategy on it is I've always tried to encourage them to plant ahead of taking something down so that you could try to get a couple of trees out there before you clear cut that park, because honestly, you have the ones that are quite obviously dead. You have the ones that are mostly obvious that they're going to die very soon. And if you go out there and start removing all of those, most of that canopy in Garvin Park is gone. And so at least in the past years, I've encouraged them to try to start planting so that you have something to replace that. But my observation is that some of those have gotten to the point that you don't want to wait for that anymore. You want to start taking those down. So
Yeah, I'm just kind of worried, where our liability is, because people's going to know they've been this way for quite a while. And if one of them does damage to some vehicle or something, or somebody actually gets physically hurt,
Yeah,
whether or not we could have some liability for not, being ahead of the problem.
Right. Some of them, there's a couple of big ones I know that I definitely want to talk to our staff, maybe beyond our capabilities on some of the bigger ones. We'll just have to see.
Like some of those that we took down by the ball field.
Yeah, there's
Those
one
are
that I
big
know
ones.
of. It's right over there by the creek, and that little thing, that's the biggest one. And yeah, so I'll start talking with our staff and see what our plan is and make sure we can get that fit into our schedule. But we may be a bit discerning on some of them if they're still greening up in certain locations. We may not take out every tree out there if we don't have something replanted, but definitely the worst ones that are quite obviously just gone and not coming back. It's time.
Okay, thank you, Josh.
Jeff?
Nothing.
Mike?
I had a call from a citizen specifically asking about some trees down on Osage and 5th Street. They're hanging down in the street and along the same lines that these dead trees or whatever Tom was talking about.
Okay.
There's a few trees that are blocking vision as you turn from a corner or stop at a lot, And I had another question about, we were talking about these truck route signs. Is there any way of the braking, the engine braking out on
Jake braking.
Highway 400, coming into town? And it would be nice to have a map of the truck routes that we were speaking of so that we can have an idea where things are at. I might just be asleep on that, but
Yeah, the only truck route we have is Highway 477.
is Custer Lane a truck route?
No. It is not.
Pardon me?
It is not.
Oh, okay. There's quite a few trucks that do turn there, like they come off of 400, like somebody said earlier, but the braking is it's hard to probably, take care of that. But then that's all I have for this evening, Mayor.
We have a little bit of that Jake braking going on there on Ohio Street too, when they're coming in and slowing down as they're getting, well, like closer to where I live, you hear them doing that.
Not ideal.
No. Does sound kind of powerful.
Hope we can take care of that here.
What's that?
I said, hope we can take care of that with these signs.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, I'll move to go into executive session for 60 minutes to discuss issues related to potential legal liability related to the performance of a current contract pursuant to the consultation with an attorney for the public aid body or agency, which would be deemed privileged to the attorney-client relationship. Justification for executive sessions under the Kansas Open Meetings Act, KSA 754319 B2, and to invite City Manager Josh Shaw and City Attorney Andrew Marino. The open meeting will resume in the council chambers at 10:39 p.m.
Second the motion.
Motion and a second to go into executive session. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
It's the quiet ones you gotta watch.
Mr. Mayor, I'll make a motion to exit executive session where no action was taken.
Second motion?
Got a motion and a second to come out of executive session where no action was taken. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Mr. Mayor, I'll make a motion to adjourn this meeting.
Second it.
Got a motion and a second to adjourn this meeting. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Good
Good night.
night.